Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah,
the
I
slides.
can see that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, once again, thank you for inviting me. I love talking about Power BI. One of the interesting things about Power BI over the last, what are we now, it must be 6 or 7 years Power BI has been around. It's grown so much. There's so much to talk about now, and almost to a point where you can't be an expert on everything. And I think we are seriously at a stage where not everyone will be an expert on everything with Power BI. And sometimes short sessions like this are an opportunity just to sit back, maybe learn a few tricks and take your knowledge to the next level. So that's really what the objective is today. So just briefly, as already mentioned, I've got a few books. This is my main book, Supercharged Power BI. It's a DAX book. It will teach you to write DAX. DAX is a tricky language, but you can learn it. If you can learn functions in Excel, you can learn DAX. There's a little bit more to it, but my book really focuses on helping people get those skills. So I've got a self-service or a BI consulting business in Sydney. We mainly work with smaller subunits. So Iman also on the call. Iman, who's I run the Sydney user group with. Iman's got a much bigger organisation, tends to do a lot of enterprise work. I tend to work with smaller companies if they need some help. And yeah, so various other things. Here's a link to my blog if you'd like to have a look at that. And anyway, I'll give these slides afterwards, and people can have a look at these links if they'd like to at that time. So the objective of this session is to introduce the M language. Now, Power Query is actually reasonably easy to learn. It's easier to learn than DAX, but underneath the front end of Power Query is a very powerful language called M. And I'm going to show you how you can become familiar with the language without going to Power Query University, if you like. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to learn about the M language just by going about your day-to-day business. So really, and hopefully I'll show you a few tricks along the way, but really the focus, I'm trying to introduce the M language to you. So high-level agenda. So just a few slides, and then I've got 3 demos. We'll see how we go for time. And yeah, it's probably about 45 minutes worth of content. So hopefully that works okay. Okay, I do like to start with this slide. I'll just quickly build the slide up. So I like to think about data and the process of taking raw data and turning it into a functional report in this way. So there's 4 logical steps. So the first step is you have to grab the data. The data is somewhere. It might be in a SQL database. It might be in an Excel spreadsheet or a text file on a website. But the first step is to grab the data and load it into the Power BI database. So when you load to the model, that's loading to the Power BI database. And so the tool we use is Power Query, and this is called data acquisition. Right? So that's the first step. Then there's a whole body of work around modeling your data. So that's creating relationships, writing formulas, making sure the structure of your tables is correct so that it's fit for purpose. That's the data modeling process. And this is really what my book is about. And it's only after you've done these 2 very large tasks that you can start to build visuals. So start to put a report on top of your data, and then finally, hopefully, you would go about sharing that. And so these are the 4 logical steps. And so this session today is squarely in the first step. I'm not saying the other things aren't important. They're definitely important, but that's not the focus of today. So we're just purely looking at data acquisition. One of the things about Power Query is that it's a tool that's in Excel as well. And so if you learn the skills for this purpose, for Power BI, you can also learn the skills and leverage those skills within Excel. Okay, so that's it with the slides. 3 live demos then. And the first one I'm going to do is what I call extracting values from a specific cell in a spreadsheet. So it'll make sense as I show it to you. So let me just come over here. Now I do have, let me show you, I've got a a folder here that's got 3 Excel files in them. They're just random files that I've created. And if you have a look at, I've just opened up one of the files. This one's called File 1. Notice that it's got a row at the top, which is sort of like a timestamp. You know, this job was run on 15th of June 2020. It was for the sales on the 14th of June. And here are the product codes and the quantities. And so my objective is to load the data from this file, as well as these other files, file 2 and file 3, into Power BI so that I can start doing reporting on it. But the trouble is that this file structure is just not ideal. The date of the sale is in this cell here. And what I really want is I want the date to be in a column here so I can load the data in a nice flat tabular format. And one of the unfortunate things is sometimes what you need is not what you're given. And this is where you need to learn some data transformation and data acquisition skills to address these issues. So I'm going to load up these files. So because I'm going to do a file combine, loading those 3 files from a folder, I'll say get data. And I'm going to load the data from a folder. Now, I'll just go and copy the, I don't think I closed it down. I just prefer to copy the path from Windows Explorer. I just find that a little bit easier. This browsing technique is not super good inside Power BI, at least. So I'll go straight to that folder that contains the files. And now the wizard, the data connection wizard, presents me with the 3 files that it finds. And I'm just going to go ahead and do combine and transform data. So I'm going to allow Power BI to help me through the process of loading this data. So I click OK. Now the way this is called file combine or combine files, right? So the way this works is that this is a wizard. This entire screen here that we're looking at now is a wizard. And the way this wizard works is it says, you tell me which file to load. So you teach me how to load a single file. And once I know how to load a single file, then I'll repeat that process over and over again for every file that I find in the folder. And so what I'm doing here is I'm teaching Power Query how to process a single file. And so I'm saying, take the first file that you find, and I want you to go and load the data in. I could either select sheet 1, or I could select table 1. In this case, I'm going to select sheet 1, and I'll click OK. And then the wizard goes off and it writes a query to process that first file. And then it creates a second query to process all of the files in the folder. So here we are. Now I'm having a bit of a screen resizing issue at the moment, but let me just get this on the screen. So here's Power Query. And so with that in mind, notice over here, now I don't know why this table 1, I didn't intend to load that. So I'm just going, I'm going to delete that. I don't know where that came from. Maybe it's strange. So here are the 2 queries. This one here is the sample query, and this one here is the query that combines all the files together. So if we take a look at these individual, the sample query has actually not done the right thing. It's connected to the source, it's navigated to the sheet, and then it promoted headers, but that's not correct. We shouldn't be promoting those headers. And then if we look at this second query, now it's combined. So here's file 1, here's file 2, file 3, and you can see that it's just not correct. There's no product codes here. We've got these headings repeating all the way down. And so the automatic file combine is not working in this case. And so if this happens to you, what I always recommend is go back to the sample file, make the changes here, get this one right, and then once this one's correct, then we come back and fix this one. So that's the general process that we're going to follow. So this one's wrong. So I'm going to basically undo this. I'll delete this step, and I'll leave the navigation because this is basically all the data. Now, at this point, I should mention that it's highly recommended that you come and turn the formula bar on. So the formula bar is on the view menu, and make sure it's turned on. This is the formula bar here, and this will allow you to actually see the underlying M code. And this is the principle that I'm trying to teach you today. So if I now apply a step using the menu, so let's say I want to get rid of this top row because I don't need it. So I'll just go remove top rows 1. And I wonder if I can get rid of this little pop-up thing. And when I execute that step, take a look at the code here. So notice that it's a line of code. It starts with an equal sign. And the M language is a functional language. Now, what I mean by a functional language, Excel is a functional language. There's a sum function. The sum function takes one or more ranges and adds the values together in those ranges. Well, the M language in Power Query is also a functional language, and it takes it's got a function name, and then it has a number of parameters. And I'll come back and I'll show you a couple of these as we go through. But for now, just be aware that this is a function called table.skip. And in this case, it's taking 2 parameters. Now, one interesting thing about the M functional language is it's case sensitive. So if I change that function to table.skip with a lowercase s, now it throws an error because there is no function that has a lowercase s. And so personally, I find that a little bit annoying, but that's the way it is. So, you just have to get used to it. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to take this date, and I really want to put it into a column down here. I want 14th of the 6th to appear all the way down here. And so I'm going to use the user interface here. So I'm going to click on this cell and then right click and select drill down. Now, when I do this, what happens is this table will disappear, and we end up just with the text that was in that one cell. So think of it as returning the value from that one cell that I drilled down on. So if I come back here, you'll see there's a table, and you can see the value in that cell. I right click, select the drill down, and now this next step is just giving me this value. And I'd also like to take another look up here now. So notice this hash quotes and then remove top rows. Now, this is actually this. So see how this says remove top rows and it says remove top rows here. Now, when you have a space in the name, in these applied steps, when it has a space, Power Query, someone's got their mic open. Would you mind just putting it on mute for me?
I will do it now.
Thank you. So when there's a space in the step name, Power Query wraps the step name in quotes, and then to differentiate between a text string and a step, it puts a hash in front. And I find that a little bit confusing. So if I come up and rename this, and I'll take out the spaces. Now, I have asked Microsoft many times to make this the default, but they haven't. They're not likely to make a change. So now there's no spaces. Now it's sort of a little bit easier to see here that it now says equals remove top rows. So basically this is saying give me whatever I had previously. And then notice I've got this curly brackets with a 0, and I've got these square brackets. Now, in this case, the curly brackets means this is the row indicator. So curly braces in this case means row. So it says go to row 0. And if I jump back here, so it says go to remove top rows and go to row 0. Well, you see there is no 0. Unfortunately, another little confusing thing about the M language, the M language is a 0-based numbering scheme. So the first row is row 0, the second row is row 1, the third row is row 2, and so on. I mean, I find it a bit annoying, but once again, that's how it works. And so what this is saying is go to the previous step and go to row 0, and the square brackets is the column indicator. And so you'll see here that there's a column called column 2. And so basically that line of code says go to the first row, go to the column called column 2, and give me the value in that cell. So basically, that's what the M language is doing. And so now I know this. I mean, if I was to take, say, this cell here, this is the third row. I could come here and change this code and say, give me 2. And now it gives me the quantity. So I'm now saying, give me the intersection of the third row and the column called column 2. So I'll put that back, and so now we've got the value that we need. Now, another interesting fun fact about Power Query is that the steps don't have to be executed in order. And so what I'm going to do now is I need to get this back again. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a manual step. And by default, when I add a manual step, it says, give me whatever you had previously, which is currently called column 2. But I don't want that. I want the previous step. So I can just type in removed top rows. And so now I've got this table. The next step is just the value. I might rename this. Let's call this sales date. And then this next step brings my table again. So I'm going to rename this. I'll call this bring back data. And so, yeah, I'm jumping all over the place, but it doesn't matter. The query is still going to work. And so now I've got this data back. I'm going to remove the top rows. So let's go remove top rows 2. And then I'm going to use the first row as headers. And now I'm going to insert my new column. So I'm going to add a column that will be a custom column. And this will be my date. Now notice the UI here only gives me 2 columns that I can insert in here. However, I'm also able to refer to this step back here. Remember, this step was a single value. And so I can say equals sales date and click OK. And now the data that's previously stored in this step of the query has now been inserted in every row. And now I can change it to a date. Okay, so that's it. That's how I've been able to grab the data from a single cell in Excel and insert it in a column. And so far, I've only done that in this sample file query. And notice that my combined query is now broken. And the reason it's broken is because the headers or the column names in my sample query have changed. They weren't called product quantity and date before. So I can now come to this step. Now this happens quite often if you start to manipulate these queries, but it's normally just this last step here, the change type step, because it's trying to find a column called job completed on the 15th of June and change the data type, but that column doesn't exist anymore. If I go back one step, it works perfectly fine. So I normally just delete that step, and then I multi-select everything and come up to transform detect data type. And pretty much that's it. So this is my, I'll call this sales data. And I'll go file, close and apply. Just let that go like that. And then I'll just build a quick little visual just so that we can make sure the data is as I expected. So I'll put the date and the product code. And so there you can see that the data is loaded. Now, of course, one of the benefits of Power Query is that it's a repeatable process. And so at the moment, I've only got these 3 files in the folder, but tomorrow I might get another file. And when I get my another file tomorrow, file 4, I'll drop it in the folder. And then once I've done that, all I have to do is come here and refresh the query. The query goes away and does its job again. And now I've got a new day's worth of data. You can see I've just duplicated the file from before. All right, so that's the first demo. So just a summary of what I covered. Make sure you turn on the formula bar. That's how you understand what the M language is doing. Look at the code that gets generated and understand how it works. Typically, it's a function name. It typically refers to the previous step and then has 1 or more parameters. This is not always the case, but that's typically how it works. I've shown you this right drill down, and I've shown you now this syntax that will allow you to get the value of any cell in any table just by specifying the step name, the row number, and the column name, and that will give you the particular data point. And the process steps can happen in any order in Power Query. It's the last step is the one that's returned at the end of the query. Any questions that have come through? Not sure.
There is a question, but I think it's not related to the topic you are talking about. We can ask you can.
This is the one about new columns being added.
Yeah, that someone said maybe we can say how does one handle new column getting added to the source and when column had a name change?
A quick answer to that. Now, you know, I've learned a lot about all of these tools over the years, and I'm pretty confident that I learned this one from Chris Webb. And so if I come here, let me take one of these files, and it probably would have been better to take file 4, but you know, so something gets added, right? And potentially this is going to break what's happening. So I'll just save that. And so yeah, so the trick I learned from Chris Webb is to go into your query, and in the very first step, now in my case, it needs to be done in this query because we're going to process every file individually. We connect to the source, we navigate. Now at this point here, if I refresh this now, because I put it in the first file, I should see the new column. But the new column adding problem doesn't occur until 6 months down the track when someone inserts a new column into the query. So here's the trick. Before I do anything else, I select the 2 columns that I need. Currently, they're the only 2 columns in the query. And then I right-click and say remove other columns. Now, of course, there are no other columns at this point in time, but this step will still work because I've basically hard-coded that says before you do anything else, remove anything that's not called column 1 or column 2. And so if I refresh this preview now, at this point, it still looks the same. But if I come back to this point, there's the extra column that I don't want to load. So hopefully that answers that question. There is actually a flip technique where you can standardize the names as well. But yeah, that's the one that I use. Okay, thanks. Love questions. So yeah, if you've got any others, please ask away. All right, let's have a look here. So yeah, so the second demo I'm going to show you is to show you how in the M language you can refer to relative column names. And I've said relative column and row. I think it's just relative column names, but anyway. So let me show you the sample that I'm going to do. I might just make sure I get a new workbook. And I've got a file here called Consolidate Worksheet. So let me show it to you. Now inside this Excel workbook, notice down here I've got January, February, March, and April. So this is sales data. I've also got a couple of blank sheets in here. And this is a particular pattern where someone sends you a file once a month, typically in this case, and each month they add a new sheet of data, right? So the actual sheet doesn't change. It's still called Consolidate Worksheets, but every month the workbook gets bigger and bigger with more files in it. And so I'm going to show you how I load this data. I'll show you a little trick, and then I'll show you a problem, and then I'll show you how to fix it. So I'm going to get data from an Excel workbook. Here it is here. Now, when the wizard pops up this time, the Get Data from Excel wizard presents you with a list of all of the sheets. If there were named ranges, they would also be there. And if there are any tables, they would also be there. In this case, they're all sheets. Now, I could come across here and multi-select these, but if I do this, I'm going to end up with 4 separate queries hard-coded for the 4 months. And then when the May data comes along, it's not going to work because I need to come back in and hard code for May. And then I'm locking myself into this repetitive pattern. So I'm not going to do that. And this is the trick here is to come up to this folder here, the sort of yellow folder, right click and say transform data. Now this is not obvious, it's not, I don't even know if it's documented anywhere. It's really hard, unless someone tells you this, you would never even know to do this. So you come up to the workbook name, right click and say transform data. And when doing that, I get this basically as query source that lists all the objects in my workbook. In this case, they're just sheets. And the benefit of doing it this way is as more sheets come in, this list will grow. Whereas if I did it the other way, the list would not grow. So that's why you need to do it this way. Now, I need to do a little bit of cleaning up here. So I'm going to get rid of the sheet 1, sheet 2s. Once again, if I hard code that, then if someone added another sheet down the track, it became sheet 3, sheet 4, then they're going to get loaded. So always try to make these steps as generic and repeatable as possible. So it occurred to me that I'd be better off saying text filter does not begin with sheet. All right, now this is obviously not going to cover every use case. If someone adds a sheet called master data, this is not going to stop that happening. But you may as well do what you can to prevent errors that are possible that may come in the future. So I'm going to say remove everything or keep everything that doesn't begin with sheet. So now I've just got my 4 tables. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the combine, with the benefit being that as new sheets come in, they'll also get combined. So this button here is just file combine. I don't need the original column name. And so now So notice that when you do it this way, you do get these. Hang on, let me just promote this first. Maybe I might be wrong. So I'll go use first row as headers. And then I'll just check to see whether I've got that header row. So go load more. Doesn't look, now see here it says data format, we couldn't convert to a number. So yeah, so I'm pretty sure what's happening is because each of those sheets has got a header, then I've promoted the first row of headers, but the other rows are still there. And when I hit this change type step, that's what triggered the error. So if I go back here and now check, load more, and there's the product key. So this is the extra header row that's occurring on sheet 2, 3, and 4 within my workbook. So I need to deselect that. And now I can go ahead and change the types. All right, so now I've got my data loaded and it's all pretty good. Now notice that the first column has got April written on it. Now that's not correct. I need to change this to the month, right? So if I rename that, notice the M language, the M code that got generated, table.rename columns. The first parameter is almost always the previous step. So in this case, the previous step was called change type. And because it's got space in it, it's hash quote change type. And then you can sort of work out here what's going on. It's saying find a column called April and rename it month. And you can sort of learn how the language works. So now if I go close and apply, at this point in time, everything's hunky-dory. So let me just, I always like to put a visual. I just like to explore the data by looking at it on the canvas. It's taking a little bit of time. So while it's doing that, I'll come back over here and I'm going, doesn't want me to do that. I guess that's fair enough. I don't know why this is taking so long. Just close down some of these. How bizarre. That one. I don't appear to be able to stop that. All right, I might have to kill it. So sorry about that. I've got the latest version of Power BI. Not sure which one it is. Of course, I killed the wrong one. All right, so a speed review. I can do this quickly. Okay, get data from Excel workbook. Connect to the worksheet. Right click, transform data. This time I'm not going to do up just to save some speed, just for speed. I'm not going to do the filter. I'll just come up and remove them. Click OK. Expand the data. Use first row as headers. Delete the change type step. Remove the repeating header. Rename this month. And I'll just do an auto transform detect data types. And I'll go file, close and apply, and hopefully go figure. I've got no idea what the problem was. All right, so there's my data loaded, and I don't know, did I rename that? I've got my month column, and I'll just bring the order quantity in, and that will do, I think. All right, so now the problem, of course, is that next month I'm going to get a new sheet in this workbook. So I'm just going to duplicate this sheet. So I'll create a copy, and I'm going to call this May. And now I hit save and close. And now I come and refresh this workbook. And now it's saying I can't find the column called April, which is the problem, which I'm going to show you how to solve. So let's go back into this query. And let's have a look at what's happening with this M code. So we've got this rename step here that says find a column called April and call it month. And that's the problem. And so that's the problem that I need to fix. Now, there's no relative column naming convention like there is with the rows. So with the rows, I could say give you row 1 by saying curly bracket 0. In this case, there's no such thing. And so I'm going to use another trick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab the names of all these columns. Excuse me. Now I'm going to create a new query. So one of the interesting things about Power Query is that it's a self-documenting language. So if I write a blank query, just excuse me for a second. Got a frog in my throat. If I write a blank query equals hash shared. So this is a special keyword. And what it does is it basically gives me a list of documentation, among other things. So blank query equals hash shared, all lowercase. Then I can turn that into a table. And so basically now I've got a table containing all of the functions that exist inside the Power Query language. And so I can now come in here and search for a function that I'm looking for. And so I need to get the names of my columns. And the names of the functions are pretty intuitive. So if I type in name, here are all the functions that work on name. And there's one here called table.columnNames. So I can select that function. And now that I've selected that function, notice this is a hyperlink. So if I click that, it will actually launch the function. But if I click in the white space to the right of that hyperlink, it actually gives me the documentation. It's a function. It takes a table as the parameter and it returns the column names as a list. So that's the function that I want to use. So what I'm going to do is I might just delete these steps. It'll just make it easier rather than inserting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new function, a new step. It refers to the previous step. That's correct. And now I'm going to write the name of the function. The Intellisense is a little bit flaky in Power Query in the M language. And so I'm going to put an open bracket first and then go and write the table function. I'll show you what happens if I don't. So if I go table.column names and then hit tab, well, in actual fact, that case it worked, but often you'll get an error when you do that, and putting the open bracket there first solves the problem. So I'm basically saying, get the function table.column names and take the table that existed at the previous step, which is basically the one I can see on the screen here now. So I click enter. And notice now that it gives me, exactly as I expected, a list of all of the column names. And notice that the first item in the list is May, because that's the first column in the table. So now, using what I've already shown you, how can I go and fetch the data in the first column? Well, I could right click and select drill down. That would work. But I could also just come up and hack the code, because I know that the curly brace 0 means give me the first row. Now, in this case, I don't have to specify a column. The difference between a list and a table, a list is like a single freelancing column, whereas a table can have many columns, and therefore you have to also specify the column name. So I just put this curly braces 0 on the end, and that gives me a text value of the name of the column. So this code is the M code that tells me the name of the first column. So I'm going to copy this code. I don't need the equal sign. I'm just going to copy this code, Control C. And now I'm going to delete that step. I'm just going to keep this in the clipboard. So delete that step. And I'll just have to refresh the preview. So now I can I'm going to do the same as I did before. Double click here, rename this to month. And notice that the M language has hard coded. It's saying in a hard coded way, go and find the column May and rename it month. But I'm going to delete that hard code and I'm going to paste what I have in my clipboard, which is the relative reference to the name of the first column. So if I paste that in here, when I do this, nothing should happen, because this tells me that the current column name is is May. So it should still work at this point in time. And then I could come up and I'll do my detect data types again, and I'll just file, close and apply. Right, so when I do that, of course, May now works. But the benefit is now if I come in here and I do a duplicate again, move or copy, create a copy, and I'll call it June, save it. Now changed, and if I refresh this workbook, there's something about, there must be another column in there. So I ruined my, I don't know why it's got this May. I think I must have had another column in here that let's come and have a look at this. So for some reason, there's another column with this one here. I'm assuming it's this one here. See, it's because I didn't remove all the other sheets before so I should have just right-click, remove other columns. Yeah, I kept these extra columns. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, now it's unhappy because I'm changing the data types. All right, look, trust me, it works. What I should have done was remove those extra columns before I did the file combine. But anyway, hopefully that makes sense. So now you can see how you can get a relative column name by following the steps that I've just shown you. All right, so let me just jump back to my slide. So a couple of things that I covered there. So hash shared gives you a list of all the functions. Now that we've got Intellisense, you can also just have a bit of a guess using Intellisense. The names are pretty good. Table.column names is a good function, and this 0 in the curly braces again is a great trick to access one of the rows. Okay, so I see there's another question suggesting, well, maybe I'll just read it now. Can you answer this at the end? How does one handle new columns? Oh, okay, we've already answered that one. Sorry about that. Okay, so the last demo that I'm going to show you is how to write a calendar table from scratch. I won't build the complete calendar table, but I want to show you some techniques of how you can make your queries a little bit more interactive and show you a few other little tips and tricks around the M language. So let me open up another workbook. And this time I'm going to go in and start a blank query. So I'm not going to connect to any data source. Just come down to other, and I'm pretty sure it's, let me type. This list is forever growing, so things move around. All right, so we've got a blank query now, and if I come up to the advanced editor, you'll see that there's nothing in this query, and it's got a source step, but there's basically nothing's been defined. All right, now I've already shown you this curly brace with a 0 in it is a row identifier. Well, those curly braces actually have another use, and so this is called the list operator. And actually, it's similar in DAX as well. You can use this to create a list or a single column table in DAX. And so one of the things you can do is you can put items in your list. So if I just go 1, 2, then it creates a list containing those two values. I can mix it up, so I can put in, so letter A, the Boolean value true, and I can basically go on and build whatever I want into a list. So this is one way that you can enter some data. Another thing that you can do is you can go 1.10, and what this does is it creates a list starting from 1 and going through to 10, incrementing by 1. So that's an interesting thing you can do. Of course, you can make the list as long as you want. And another thing I could do is I could use a number like this. So from 44,562 to 45,000. And if I now turn that list into a table and now change the data type to a date, notice that I now get 1st of January 2022. So Power Query uses the same numeric date system that Excel uses, where every date is converted to a number after the 31st of December 1904 or 1900 or something. All right, so I could use this to create a list of dates, but I'm not going to do that. What I'll do this time is I'm going to try and create a list of dates. So I could go back and do my hash shared thing again, but instead I'm going to use the Intellisense. I need to get some dates. So if I type in the word dates, I'll get all the functions that create dates. And I might just try, let's go list.dates, because I do happen to know the name of the function. There's a function here called list.date. Dates. Now, I think there's an error here. If I hit tab, notice how it kept my lowercase version of list and then it appended another one on the front. So that's the bug in the Intellisense that I talked about before. So list.dates. Now, if you enter a function in the toolbar like this and don't put any parentheses and hit enter, it gives you that same documentation that I showed you about before. So if I put the parentheses here, it will throw an error because it's expecting you to pass parameters. But in this case, if you don't put parentheses, it just gives you the documentation, which is really kind of cool. So now I can see how it works. And in fact, this documentation, I can actually use the documentation to write the code for me. So let's say I want to start from the 1st of January 2021. It's asking me for a count. That's interesting. I'll put 10 and then the step. So this is you know, you can have a look. Step is the duration. And so I've done this before, but I happen to know that, you know, if I want a daily step, you've got to put a 1. And then I invoke that function. And there it is. There's my list starting from 1 going through the 10th of January. And this is a little bit confusing, but it's very similar to what I showed you before. So notice how we've got this query 1. Well, query 1's up here. So query 1 is the name of the function. And then this step says, take query 1 and pass these parameters to it. So what it's actually doing is it's splitting the function into 2 separate steps. And what I could do is I could just actually come and copy this code, this function name, Control-C, and I'll just replace it with the reference to it. So it's sort of like an absolute reference, if you like. So I'm going to put the function name there instead, list.dates. And there we have it. Now I can get rid of this. I don't need that anymore. And I might just rename this. I'll call it my calendar. All right, so now I've got a list of dates from 1 to 10. I'll turn that into a table. And I'll rename this column. I'll call it date. And I'll change the data type to a date. All right, so we're off and running, but really what I'd like this this calendar to be able to do is I'd like to be able to specify the starting date just as a user. I just want to type in the starting date and have it start from the date that I want it to start. And so if I go back here to this earlier step, notice how the date is passed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hard code the date. So I'm going to add a new step. Instead of referring to the previous step, I'm not even going to use an equal sign. I'm just going to put in the date, 1st of the 1st, 2021. Now, when I type it in like this, Power Queries, it understands that this is a date. If I put an equal sign in front, it thinks it's a division. It's saying 1 divided by 1 divided by 2021. But if I don't put the equal sign in, it understands that it's a date. So this is going to be my start date. Now, I'd also like to be able to specify the end date of my calendar table. And good practice in calendar tables is to extend your calendar table through to the end of the current year or end of the year that contains data. So I'm going to add another custom step. I don't want to refer to the previous step, but what I want to do is I want to know the end date of the current year. So I need to know what today's date is so that I can work out the end date of the current year. So if this was Excel, most of you would probably do this in a heartbeat without even thinking about it. You'd use the today function. So I could try that today. All right, there's no function today. That didn't work. Okay, what else? Now. Okay, here we go. There's a function called datetime.localNow. So that sounds promising. So I'm going to take that function. And no brackets, hit enter so I can see the documentation. Returns a date time value. Parameters, there's no parameters for this function. And so if I just put the brackets in, no parameters, there we have it. There's the current date time. It's the 8th of September. It's nearly 7 p.m. in Sydney at the moment. And these decimal places are minutes and seconds, I think. All right, but I don't need the date time. I need the date. So somehow I have to extract the date portion. Now, admittedly, I do know some of these things, but I'm just showing you if I wanted to extract that and it's a functional language, then I'm going to put the bracket in front. I would go dates and look for date time dot date is the name of the function. I happen to know that. You could go in and do the hash shared if you're not sure. So that should extract the date portion for me. And now if I want to get to the end of the year, how am I going to get to the end of the year? Well, I could do the same thing again. I'm just going to type in end of year. So there's a function date.end of year, and that will extract the last date of the current year. So there's my end date, and here's my start date. I better rename this. End date. Okay, so end date and start date. So now I've got these two entry points. I'm going to go back to the source. So instead of hard coding this, I'm going to delete that and refer to the start date. Once again, notice that the steps don't have to be in order. So this source step is the first step, and it's referring to this start date, which is the 5th step. I don't have to change the order of these steps for this to work. Right, now I've got a problem because this function does not ask me what the end date is. It's asking me how many days do I want the calendar to, or the list of dates to continue. So I actually need to subtract the end date from the start date. So I'll go ahead and do that. It's the end date minus the start date. Notice just doing a little bit of simple M, and then I'll rename this, and this is the calendar length. Now, I'm pretty sure actually I've got to add 1 to this because that's the way mathematics works. Oh, didn't like me doing that. Okay, now why didn't it like me doing that? It didn't like me doing it because notice even though I subtracted that, you can sort of see from the value that this is not an integer. It's actually it's a date time format. So it's days, hours, minutes, and seconds. And so somehow I need to extract the number of days from this. So I'm going to put my open bracket. So I happen to know that it's duration. So there's a function, duration.days. You could search for it, but just to save a bit of time, I know that's right. So duration.days, when I hit enter, now I've got an integer, and now I can add 1 to my integer. So I need my calendar to be 730 days long. So I can go back to my source and replace this with the calendar length. And if I I might have to come back here. I wanted to show you, see if I sort this descending, just insert a step, takes it through to the 31st of December. So that's all good. One thing I like to do, because I now need to get this list of dates or this column of dates right at the bottom. And so what I often will do is rename this step, and I'll call this all dates or something like that. Getting rid of the spaces. Now I can create another step, and instead of referring to the previous step, I'm going to refer to all dates. And basically now I've got it. So now I've got my list of dates. Now next time I do a calendar table, I can just come up here. If I want to start it from 2022, I just make a change there, and I come here and my calendar starts from 2022, or basically whatever you want. So now the other benefit of this is that if I come up to the advanced editor, this is all the code that I've written, and what I do is I copy this, Control-C, and I'll typically stick it inside Notepad, or in fact, I tend to store mine in OneNote. And so what I'll do now is I'll build out my complete calendar table and copy the advanced editor code and store that in OneNote. And then next time I need a calendar table, I just cut and paste from OneNote directly into Power Query, go in and change the start date, and basically everything else works from there. So I'll just add a couple of quick steps. So I'd go here, add a column, date, I'll add the year, add another column, date, I'll add the month, another column, date, add the month name. If I have a month name, I'll often try and have a short month name as well. So I'll go add column, extract first characters 3. So now I've got a month name that's long, and this is short month, and so on and so on forth. You just go ahead now and build out all the columns that you need in your calendar table, and then once it's finished, you can come back into the advanced editor and copy that code and insert it somewhere else. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and just jump up to my summary slide. So yeah, I mean, look, I learned some of these tricks by reading books and blogs. Ken Pools has got a good book with Miguel Escobar. Chris Webb's got a good book as well. I've introduced this keyword shared for you, so you can find out more language and the functions that exist. And yeah, I showed you this little trick where I actually generated some lines of code, and then go and replace some of that code with the custom steps that I've created. So yeah, so look, I think we're sort of at the top of the hour, so I feel that's probably a good time to take a pause. So I mentioned at the start of the session that I do have online consulting. I also do training with Ken Pools. So I would like to offer everyone a discount if they'd like to come over to our website, skillwave.training. There's a 20% discount code there that will be valid until the end of the weekend if you'd like to take me up on that. So let me ask, are there any questions? Okay, there was something here, something similar to extract the start date from my fact table. Yeah, so that's a great question. So if I was to let me go ahead and load this. I'll just load one of these files. No, actually, that's a bad example. So I'll just open another workbook. It's actually very good practice to extract the start date and the end date from your fact table. So if I was to get data from Excel, just let me see if I'll just load up an AdventureWorks. I'll just load the fact table. Oh, this is interesting. This must be, it's not what I expected it to be. I don't know why. All right, I know it somewhere else. I'll find it. Take this one instead. Okay, so here's I'll just load up the sales table. I'll go into transform data. Normally when I do this, what I would do is create a staging table. It's good practice. We cover this in our Power Query Academy training. But what I'll do is I'll right click and disable the load of that table. And that didn't say disable load. And I'll call this a staging table. And then from there, I'll right click and reference. And then this is the one that I'll actually load. Now, one of the benefits of doing this with a staging table, and if I come up and show you the query dependency view, so I connected to the file, created a staging table, which is disabled, and then I've got the actual table that I loaded. But one of the advantages of a staging table is I can now put a branch. So I can reference data in this table and create another query out to the side. So this is one of the use cases for a staging table. So what I would then do is come here and maybe, so it's the order date. So I'll just do whatever technique you can use. I think I'll remove other columns, and then there's probably keep date filter is earliest. There we go. So this should I'm not sure why it's kept so many. I'll do something different. I mean, whatever technique you use, I'm just going to sort it. And now that I've sorted it, at the top is going to be the first date in the calendar table. Now, of course, I could right click, drill down and get that value, but I encourage you to have a go at writing the code. I know the code to do this because I did it before. It's curly brackets 0 for the first row, and it's square brackets order date. So it's the intersection of those. So if I do that, that should work. So there's my date. So I'm going to, now what I forgot to do when I pointed to my staging table, let me come back here. I forgot to reference it. I actually started to manipulate that staging table. So I need to get my staging table back. So I'm going to right click, extract previous, and I'll call this one new staging. Yeah, that was a mistake that I made. So let me show you again on the this query dependency view. So now I've got my new staging table, the sales staging table. I've made a botch of this. So I need the sales table to point to the new staging table. And so let's have another look. Yeah, so I've got and now I've got the sales table that gets loaded unappended. And then this is the one, this is going to be my this is going to be my start date. Now, of course, it's good practice to get the first date of the year, but you know, I'll skip over that. And then I could do the same for the end date. I could right click and in this case, I'm going to duplicate it. And this will be the end date. And this time I'll have to remove other columns, and I sort the rows in the opposite direction. So notice how I'm just interacting with the M code. I've learned a little bit about it now. And so that should give me the end date. And now that I've got the end date, I can use those two queries and insert them inside my query just like I did before. If I wanted to get the end of year, I would do it here. So I'd go table, sorry, what was it? That end of year. I'd have to put another bracket. One thing to note is that if you break these queries, that's it, it's broken. So if you're going to start interacting with the UI, maybe just do a file, close and load, save the workbook first. There's no undo. So once you make a mistake, if you can't recover, you can get yourself in trouble. So you can either file, save as. The other thing that you could do is come into the advanced editor and just cut the code and paste it somewhere. And that's basically your fallback plan. And then if that fails, you can come back and paste it back in again. Okay, hopefully that helps. What else we got here? So like the copy to Notepad, yeah. So OneNote, yeah, I always find it in OneNote because it's always indexed. You can go and search for it. Can we copy it, query and paste in Notepad? Oh yeah, so I think that's true. If you come here, yeah, so I went into advanced editor, but is it Mohammed just made this comment, which is exactly right. I forgot about this, but if you come in here, if I was to say copy this sales query, it's really smart. It'll actually copy the new staging query as well. So I come here, right click and copy, and then if I go to Notepad and paste, notice how it actually brings both of those queries across. Unfortunately, once it's copied into Notepad, you can't copy it back into, I don't think you can anyway. These things change all the time. Control C. So you can't paste it back. Then you actually have to paste it back the way that I showed you how to do it. Okay, so good point. Thank you for raising that. One time choosing several queries and copy the Notepad. Can we get access later to the session recorded? You have to ask.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, I will share that on YouTube, and you can find the link on one of our groups.
Okay, great. I see a question here. In the case I need to create a calculated column, is it better to make it in Power Query or via DAX? Well, in the famous words of Marco Russo, it depends. And it really, I think there's a bit of personal preference in here. I personally prefer to do all of my data creation in Power Query because it keeps it all together. Now, but it's not a hard and fast rule. And I'll give you a good example. If I go back to, let me think for a second. If I wanted to, let me come up here, where's my recent sources? I'm just going to go and bring in a bit more of the AdventureWorks database. Okay, so now I've got my AdventureWorks database and I've got a customer table here. Now let's say I want to classify my customer as being large or small. All right, so if you've got more than $2,000 worth of sales, you're large. If you've got less than $2,000 worth of sales, you're small. And I mean, that's a valid business use case, right? So how do I do that in Power Query? Well, to do it in Power Query, somehow I need to get the sales data out of the sales table, insert it into the customer table. I need to do a group by, aggregate all the sales purchases for that customer, and then put some sort of Boolean column in that tells me whether the sales are a certain level. And I could definitely do that in Power Query. But in this particular case, I would prefer just to do it in DAX, because when I get into my data model, and I'll just go ahead and load that data, the first thing I'm going to do in my data model is I'm going to create a relationship. So if I zoom out, so there's my products, my territory, so there's my sales territory key. So I'm going to create those relationships. And I'm also going to write a measure. So I'll probably come up here and I'll write a new measure called total sales. And that's equal to sum of the sales amount. Right, so I've done those two things, and these are part of my model. I need the measure and I need the relationship. So if I now wanted to know, is this a large customer? And now I'm back to the question, do you do it as Power Query or do you do it as DAX? Well, I could come to the customers table, add a new column, and all I have to, this will be called large customer, yes or no, true or false, TF. And so now I'm leveraging my model. So I just have to say equals total sales. Now, when I type equals total sales, it gives me the sales for each customer. It's leveraging the logic, which I hard-coded in the measure. It's leveraging the logic, which is the relationship joining the two tables together. And then I can just turn this into a true-false statement. So that's greater than or equal to 2,000. So if that's true, it's a large customer. If it's false, it's a small customer. So now, and the point is that's very simple to do because I'm leveraging this relationship and the business logic hard-coded in the measure. I need those things anyway. If I was to do that column in Power Query, I would have to recreate the logic of the relationship by doing a merge between two tables. I would have to do a group by, and then I'd have to hard code the summation of the values in the sales amount column, and then have to add a conditional column after that. So to me, it feels like a lot of overhead when I've already got 75% of the problem solved directly in the model. So I've given you a couple of different examples. Generally, I do use Power Query unless I need to leverage measures and relationships in order to generate the column. Yeah, can I create a column in the source code? Yeah, so absolutely the best idea is to push the creation of your data as far back to the source as possible. So if you've got SQL and you've got someone that can write a view in SQL and create the additional columns, I would say definitely do it there. These SQL databases are designed and optimized to produce these things on the fly. So write it as a query. The benefit of doing it as a query in SQL is that then the next time somebody comes to load the data, it's available to them as well. They don't have to reinvent the calculated column or the DAX, the Power Query transformation. Always push it as far to the source as practical. Put extension, please let me know why we take error while combining Excel file. XLS format. So the XLS file format is, well, it's depreciated now. So now the XLS file format, I'm pretty sure uses the ACE, what's it called? ACE driver, something like that. ODB, no, it's not ODBC. This thing here. In order to load Excel files, you need the Microsoft ACE OLEDB12 driver. So, and this is the driver that Power BI needs to load an Access database, but it's also the same technology that's used to encode the XLS file format. So you'll have to install this first and then it should work. Just one other thing on the XLS files is that quite often you'll have a legacy system, such as some sort of legacy finance system that will allow you to do an extract, so QuickBooks or something like that. It allows you to export your data in Excel format and often that Excel format will be XLS format. But sometimes these systems don't do a very good job at generating a valid Excel file. And so while you can open the file in Excel and save it again, often Power Query won't recognize it as being a valid file. And so the fix for that normally is just to open the file in Excel and hit save, and that will correct any file issues, and then it should load in Power Query. XLSB should work. I believe XLSB should work this because it's the XML format in binary form. So I don't think there's any problems with XLSB. It's only XLSS files. That's my understanding, but I don't deal with these things every day, so I could be wrong. If you can't load XLSB, then that'll be the reason. But I think they do work.